Hello, everyone, and welcome to Autism Stories, where we connect you with amazing people that help teens and adults with autism become more independent and successful. I'm your host, Doug Bletcher, the founder of Autism Personal Coach. When you get the opportunity to coach people with autism and help them reach their goals, it is a collaborative process. Sometimes you teach them in the process, and other times they teach you. One thing I've learned from several of our clients is about something that some refer to as the double rainbow, which is the intersection of autism and the LGBT community. It is so important to support all people with autism, and all too often, those that are part of the double rainbow are not getting the support they need. Today, we have an important discussion about the double rainbow with Nathan Morgan of Milestones Autism Resources. Nathan is a self-advocate who has shared his experiences on panels, at events, and the local news. Nathan is passionate about teaching and autism-related research. We hope you enjoy today's conversation. Nathan, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you're currently the Early Intervention and School Age Coordinator for Milestones Autism Resources. What attracted you to the position, and what have you learned from this experience?
A bit of a journey that took me there. I started out really wanting to work with international populations, and then on a whim I decided I have autism. Let's give this a shot. Let's see how this works out. And it was a good fit. I felt really positive about the work that I was doing. I started interning at Milestones. And then just through that, I really found that I was good at early intervention, that I had an understanding of the theory and the framework, and it was also something that was exciting. I could get in and I can help change lives from a young point, and I know I feel very it's very rewarding to work in this field. So that's how I actually got into early intervention, was kind of on a whim. As I've continued to work in the field, I'm actually not even sure why I wanted to work in international populations in the first place. I have such a strong interest in IEP planning and providing supports and really guiding families in this way. It's been something that I really enjoy.
There are many things about you that have impressed me, but something that really jumped out to me quickly is how thoroughly you have responded whenever we've communicated through email. Now, so many of the clients that Autism Personal Coach we serve struggle with responding to emails. So is this something that's just come naturally to you, or is it a skill you've learned to develop all over time?
It's actually probably a little bit of both. It's a little bit of an illusion and a little bit of some supports. So if you look at my personal email, I have hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands of unread emails. A lot of them are spam from Giant Eagle or other places with coupons and different things. But with work, I take my job very seriously. It's something that's very important to me. And so I learned pretty early on that my old habits weren't going to help me, and in fact might hinder my work with families, and nobody likes it when someone doesn't respond for a really long time. So I actually have made a lot of use of, and I've used a bunch of different programs over the time. So like Outlook has a whole bunch of folders that you can use and auto sorting features, and that was always really helpful. Switching over to Gmail was fine because that had a lot of other supports too. I actually can have things put in specific folders as they come in, so I know priority on which I can respond to them, so that's been very helpful. I can also sort them so that I can always see the unread ones first. And so even when I check my email from my cell phone, if I'm not on the clock, because that was the thing I'm not supposed to do, I'm not supposed to check my email outside of work hours. Otherwise, I'd never probably quit working, because it is almost a special interest for me, and I think that can help people with autism be really successful if they get into a profession. But there's also that work-life balance that we have to strike. But really having those supports helped, and I didn't know about them at first. It was really over the years I've had supervisors and other people guiding me and showing me that I can use all of these features. And sometimes it just takes someone who's particularly tech savvy to show how to do something, and it can make your life a whole lot easier. Technology, I think, has been very helpful in my workplace experience.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know in the past you've shared your knowledge and experiences by presenting on important topics in the autism community. One such presentation that you co-presented previously that we're both very passionate about is the double rainbow. Can you share with our listeners what the double rainbow is and why it matters?
There are personal reasons why it matters to me, and we'll talk about that soon, I'm sure. But really, as a whole, there are a lot of people who are on the autism spectrum, but they're also on the LGBT spectrum. And since the LGBT community uses a rainbow flag and a spectrum of light, and it's called the autism spectrum, it wasn't me. It was someone more clever than I am who decided that it's two spectrums overlapping, and so what better way to represent that than a double rainbow? Mm-hmm. So that's really what it represents, is the people who are both on the autism spectrum and identify as LGBT. And if research is to be believed, which there's a lot of really credible stuff out there, people with autism identify at a much higher rate than neurotypical people, and there are some reasons for that are not quite clear yet. We're still, I think, as a community, trying to understand if it's an actual biological difference that may have some connection to autism, or if it is a social difference, because people with autism are, the pros and cons there, people with autism have less time picking up, or less easy time picking up certain social cues, but also they may not hide their identity, and some people in the LGBT community do hide their identity for safety reasons, so that does have some implications for the autism community as a whole, but also for the LGBT community, and we want to try to figure out ways that we can support them and be successful and be safe and really build a community.
Now, self-disclosure of autism can be a complicated and very personal experience. However, talking about when someone has to essentially come out twice as having autism and then as being part of the LGBT community.
So I think when people think of coming out, it's a one-time thing. People think, oh, you came out of the closet, you're out, for the LGBT side of things. But really it's not. It's a continuous process, and it's always difficult to navigate, and there are lots of things that I have to consider for that side of things. Also, since I have autism, that's another side of things. Lots of people with autism do disclose, but in some cases they may not. It may not feel safe to share about it at a workplace, or if you're trying to start dating someone or have interactions with someone might not understand what autism is, and that might not be a conversation that you're ready to have. So, but it's a continuous process. There have been some situations where I'd say particularly, I found it easier to come out as being on the autism spectrum than being LGBT in that part of that community. But then other times it might be the opposite. It might be easier to come out in the LGBT as part of the LGBT community and not so much the autism community. And the hard part is figuring out when and how to go about doing that. That's still a process that I've been working through. It's a very individual process. My hope is that by advocating and sharing about the double rainbow, more professionals like yourself and me and my colleagues and other people can help guide people through that process, because we do talk about disclosing autism at work or disclosing autism in your community, but sometimes there are other factors.
Do you see a stigma or discrimination against those that identify as part of the double rainbow?
I do, and it's actually, I have some personal experiences that are difficult. I probably won't get into all of those here, but just as a whole, I'd say I absolutely do. When I first started trying to date and build friendships and relationships, many of the people in the LGBT community were not comfortable with the idea of autism and sensory issues, at least in the circles that I had reached out to. And so I had some pretty negative responses, even a conversation that was going pretty well online when I mentioned that I couldn't go to a club or something for sensory reasons or things like that. The follow-up questions were always, some of them were pretty mean, and there were some pretty harsh slurs that were used that made me feel like almost giving up on even starting that process. Fortunately, I did meet people who were understanding of the autism piece. As for the LGBT piece in the autism community, that's a difficult thing too. I know growing up, oftentimes the assumption would be made that my sexual orientation, gender identity were impacted by my autism in a way that was clinically significant. People would say, and I use a lot of technical terms because social work and psychology and such are my special interests, so feel free to help me step back if I, because I know perseverations and those types of terms are probably, I'll just say my special interest. That people would assume that it was my special interest, or maybe there was a social skills deficit that made it easier to interact with boys than it did with girls. And so there was that tendency to try to treat it away. So there is a thing where people will try to convert or cure the LGBT identity through various therapies that are proven to be very, very harmful and can lead to really high suicide rates. But even people who didn't ascribe to that would still look at my sexual orientation and my gender identity through the lens of my autism, which is helpful in a way because I think that it is interconnected, but it wasn't viewed as a legitimate part of my identity. It was viewed as a perseveration or a special interest, or a misunderstanding, or there's kind of this underlying idea, I think, that is in the disability community, that people with autism can't have romantic or sexual feelings, or aren't capable of processing or comprehending that. And I think that cuts across all disability circles, but it's something that I have noticed, especially growing up when I was working with therapists. I actually did receive the question, do you think that you like boys just because it's easier to talk to them than it is to girls, or maybe it's easier to read their social cues? And even then I was like, I wasn't sure why they were asking me that. It wasn't a comfortable question. It was almost traumatic though, and I think, so I started out, going back to the previous question, I apologize, I'm kind of maybe going a different direction, but so I came out to my mom at a really, really young age. So when I was about 7 or 8, I kind of knew that I was a little bit different. I didn't have, if you're familiar with puppy love, where kids kind of have crushes on other kids.
Sure.
My crushes were other boys in the classroom, or TV characters, or, and so I didn't think anything of it, and I shared with my mom, and she just like, whatever, you're 8, it's not an issue. Happened again when I was maybe 12 or 13, and my mom, and this is almost an exact quote, I can't quite remember her words, she's like, we already had this discussion, it's okay. And then after that, it was dropped, it was done. And I think that helped a lot, but actually I almost learned in reverse. I learned through a lot of bullying and issues with my peers that other people weren't okay with it. So even though I think my autism helped me to come out, I think I didn't feel like there was any shame or anything to be concerned about. And I think my autism really helped with that, so that's why I did come out to my mom at such an early age. I didn't feel like it was something that needed to be hid. It wasn't a big deal. But over the years though, through bullying, through, you almost learn to keep it to yourself. And so where some people are scared to come out at first and then it becomes easier, I think it was actually the opposite for me, if that makes sense.
And when you had those terrible experiences, you took like a step back.
Yeah, and I started to realize that maybe it wasn't safe to disclose or share that. But more so, when I said that I had autism, it almost made things more comfortable in some cases. Like people would almost understand, well, this is why he can't have really loud noises, or this is why, so I think for me it became easier to disclose my autism. When I actually first started working at Milestones, I did tell Beth, she actually is my boss, my supervisor. She's done a previous podcast with you.
Yes, Beth Thompson, yeah.
Yeah, she's actually one of my closest mentors. She's been very helpful for me. And so I told her about my autism pretty much right away. And but she didn't know about my LGBT identity until just casually I let it slip. I was so comfortable, I just let it slip over a staff lunch that we were having. She asked, am I seeing anyone? And I just mentioned, I have a partner of several years. And she was like, what? Wait a minute, come back, and how do I not know this? And I just thought that was a piece that I I didn't know, because there's a lot of discrimination that can happen at work. People can be, well, not so much Cuyahoga County and all parts of Ohio. There are laws protecting people, but in other places, it is still legal to fire someone for no other reason than that. And sometimes I feel, because of the supports that I need for my autism, it can be harder to come out in settings. Like, I didn't let people at my other internships know. I just kind of made it a habit, because I knew that I needed my autism supports. My autism supports, sensory needs, structure, routines, were things that I knew that I needed to be successful in employment. Really, now that I've been able to be at work, it was almost like the floodgates were broken. And for a while, I probably overshared, just because there was that relief. All of this stuff that was on my shoulders could just come out into the open. And now there aren't many people who are talking about the intersection of autism. There have been some articles talking about why it's important. There have been a lot of researchers showing their data, but it's not something that I've seen at a lot of conferences. So I'm hopeful that, even though my background is in early intervention, that self-advocacy piece, and my social work background, I think that myself and Beth and other people can really help make a change and help build a community.
Mm-hmm. And for like other professionals, or just anyone that really wants to kind of be an ally to those that are part of the double rainbow, what suggestions do you have for them?
This is something that I've given a lot of thought to. So I know that in the autism community, we really emphasize the expression, nothing about us without us. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good expression to go by. But there's also, with the LGBT community, I don't know if you know this or not, there's actually a variation of the rainbow flag for allies, which I thought is really helpful. I think there's kind of a combination. So in the LGBT community, heterosexual, cisgendered people have almost been ambassadors for the community. Part of that's a safety thing, because people have been less retaliatory, perhaps less frequently or less severely, against cisgendered heterosexual people. So it almost was a safety piece. But I think more than that, sometimes our allies have a platform, but also it's a matter of recognizing, like in the autism community, I think we're starting to come to that realization that we really do need to allow people with autism to speak on their own behalf too. So there's kind of that, there are pros and cons to that. So I think the ambassadors can help open the door, but really let the self-advocate stand on that stage. The other downside, though, to really having that is there are still marginalized communities. I think, I'm not sure how familiar you are with LGBT issues, but so like trans women of color, for example, are really face discrimination and oppression and abuse and violence at a disproportionately high rate. And but their experiences have largely been ignored, because I think sometimes the advocates want to, in a way, well-intentioned, like normalize or say we're just like you. And I don't know if that's the right message to send, because we are different. People who have autism are different. People who are LGBT are different. But I think the message needs to be being different isn't a bad thing. Mm-hmm. I would say, even in my own office, I have a lot of neurotypical coworkers, and they all function differently. They all have different perspectives, and that's what makes it work, though, is all of these differences coming together. They can think about things from different ways, and they can be more effective in helping people because they have those different backgrounds. And so I think the message needs to not be, we're just like you. It needs to be, we're different, and that's a good thing.
And we just need to respect those differences.
Yes.
Now, one of the major challenges I've seen from people that are part of the double rainbow is developing community. So I always say, when we don't have community, we feel alone and isolated, and those mental health challenges for all of us increase greatly. So what challenges have you seen in developing community for those that are part of the double rainbow?
So that's actually something that I've experienced firsthand. I don't have any good solutions, but I have experience with it. I know that most of the LGBT spaces that I've been to haven't been particularly sensory friendly. Mm-hmm. And sensory friendly can be a hard thing to do, just in the sense that everybody's sensory stuff is different.
Yeah.
But But I mean, there are some basic steps that might help, having a dedicated quiet space, addressing lighting, having dimmers if that's at all an option, but also planning events where it's not loud music, flashing lights. That tends to happen a lot in a lot of the spaces, and that can be difficult. I'd say when you have, I'd say a lot of programs for LGBT people do tend to be really underfunded. And I think that's a big contributing factor. The groups and such that do exist make do with what they have, but sometimes that makes it difficult for like wheelchair access or sensory needs, and so I think people with disabilities, autism or not, can sometimes feel inadvertently excluded. I think also the disability community doesn't always acknowledge or embrace or accept LGBT identity. That's been a big thing that I've noticed. Even growing up, well, even today, if I try to search LGBT social stories for people with autism, if they exist, they're very, very hard to find because I have looked.
A lot of research.
I've spent a lot of time looking for those. I think also, even just the space, though, it's kind of assumed. I think we have this tendency to assume that people with autism will never date, so why does their orientation even matter? And I think that because orientation is a part of who we are, it's our attraction, it's whether we can vocalize or verbalize our experiences, it can matter. And then also, if we're trying to prepare someone, for a life, which includes romantic partners and employment, it is something that we absolutely do have to address. I think, so people with autism, I think, there are a lot of assumptions. I think sometimes people make assumptions that people with autism won't be capable because that's what some of the research has said. People with autism don't get married. People with autism don't date. People with autism may struggle with employment, be unemployed, be underemployed. But if we're going in with the attitude that people aren't going to need that support, then we don't create it, and then I think we just create this vicious cycle where the needs aren't being met and where we're not preparing people to be able to have those experiences. That's just my personal opinion.
You will be co-presenting on this very topic, the Double Rainbow, at the Milestones National Autism Conference here in Cleveland in June. So if people want to hear more about this and from you, how can those that want to attend register for the conference? And are you speaking on the first or the second day?
I'm actually speaking on both days.
Oh, okay.
About a couple different issues. So, and I can't recall which one's which. I'll have to check my schedule again. So I will be presenting on sensory issues with 2 other self-advocates who I've presented with before, and we're really excited about. We're going to be changing it up a bit, adding some different experiences, but we're also going to be doing. So this will be the first time I think the Milestones Conference has had a double rainbow session. So I'm like a trailblazer, I guess is maybe the term. But I'm actually doing that alongside my supervisor, Beth. She actually did the original presentation with me that we did at OCaliCon, and it was really well received. It was quite a bit shorter there. We did a 15-minute monologue, and this will be our full 1-hour session, and we're really trying to use it as a opportunity to lay the foundation for the discussion to take place. So there will be some personal experiences shared, but there will also be some foundational knowledge that will be shared, as well as some in-depth information too. We want to make sure that we can kind of address wherever everyone is.
What was the feedback from your presentation at OCaliCon?
People were pretty responsive to it. Even some of the audience members in that moment, during the question and answer piece, during the after we were pulled aside to answer some questions. Parents are really responding to it. There was a parent of a transgender child, 7 or 8 years old, and she said it was difficult to find resources and services that were supporting that. And we're not viewing it as poor parenting or something fundamentally flawed with the child. And I think that that's an attitude that the LGBT community still experiences. But I think it's even harder when there are disability needs and there is a need for other services outside of just school. Then these parents have to advocate for finding inclusive therapy providers, inclusive, transportation, everything that they might need for that child growing up. But the response was really positive. Lots of people were even asking for more inclusive sex education in their schools, or sex education, period. Beyond that, though, so sex education is just a piece that really addresses the safety, the physical contact piece. But I think also there have been a lot of schools, not so much, I'm not sure of any instances where it's been added in the special education curriculum, but inclusive curriculums where it's talking about people who are LGBT are humans too, and it's okay to accept them. Where it doesn't talk about the sexual side of things, it just talks about accept people as people.
Right.
But many of the parents were wanting stuff like that, and I there may be some pushback, but there's also a lot of support. And I think that this is a community where you have self-advocates driving this discussion. A lot of the people who are talking about the double rainbow right now aren't service providers. They are the people with autism saying, this is our experience, we're asking you guys for help, and you guys for 20 years, I'm saying you guys in the sense that, like, I'm not meaning like you specifically, but people aren't offering the support. It would have been, I can't help but wonder how different my experiences might have been if someone explained the gay community's dating dynamics, which are actually a lot more egalitarian. We split the checks, we back and forth on the checks for food, but all these dynamics that are, I think are taken for granted. Even just the social skills can be different. But then also trying to figure out when it's safe to disclose. Because if you disclose your LGBT identity in the wrong place, you could be the victim of violence in a way that, people who are on the autism spectrum do experience violence and abuse, but it's not, what I've seen, not specifically targeted, like almost just trying to erase your existence almost.
Getting back to like disclosing and making sure it's in a safe environment or a safe person, how much of the challenges of autism make it difficult to determine that?
So that is something that I still struggle with. It can be very difficult to tell if it's safe to disclose, where there might be instances where a person generally has been very positive towards me, and so I feel like it's okay to even just casually mention my partner. His name's James, by the way. That's a shout out to you. He's out of town right now, so hopefully you're having a nice trip. But I even if I casually mention stuff, it's there can be negative responses, and there have been instances where people have just said, like, I remember when I was a teenager, there was a girl who I was talking to, and we were playing trading cards with each other, and she had mentioned that she liked a celebrity, and I had mentioned that I liked them too, and then essentially the response, our whole card game match turned out like we were done with that, and she said, I can't talk to you anymore. And that wasn't something that I had to experience physical harm for. It was certainly telling me that it wasn't okay to talk about something that I thought was fine. And there are those casual interactions where there can be a double standard. So that makes it even harder to tell, because people will talk about trips that they had to Disneyland with their romantic partners, or they'll have pictures of their family on their desk. And so in some places it might seem like it's okay to talk about it, but then it's only okay if you're heterosexual or cisgendered, and then other than that, it's not. So neurotypical people can be really confusing, and I actually have a whole slide dedicated to social skills that neurotypicals need to develop for my double rainbow presentation, because people on the double rainbow gets asked some pretty peculiar questions that people probably wouldn't ask others. But I'd say I tend to look for cues. I tend to see, so a lot of people will have human rights campaign stickers on their cars. Those are the equal signs. Or there may be a rainbow in the office space. Sometimes there's just a sticker that says this is a safe space. And that's that's a nice verbal cue that it's maybe a safer place.
Maybe.
I mean, sometimes people will have sometimes it almost feels like a bit of a, I don't know if this is the right term, but like a bait and switch. But I'd say more often than not, I think if people are having those stickers, it's a good cue. Also, if they are speaking positively about people who are LGBT. Something else I've learned, and this wasn't an experience I so much had, but I learned from another self-advocate who I had met with, that sometimes people are accepting of their kids being, or other people's kids being LGBT, but not their own kids. So like if it's their own kids, then there are implications about grandkids and carrying on the family name, and there are lots of other things. So sometimes that's not always a good cue. Maybe people are okay with LGBT people if they're not connected closely, which almost seems like it would be the opposite. It almost seems like, well, you're my kid, I'll love you no matter what. Rather, it's they're not my kid, so whatever they do is fine. But so that sometimes I think it can be hard to read the messages that neurotypical people put out there. But ultimately, I've always chosen to err on the side of caution. I think there are people who are more courageous than I am in the sense that they do come out pretty much everywhere. And that's something that I wish I had that level of bravery sometimes, just because I had some pretty negative experience that had happened to me because I was both on the autism spectrum and LGBT. So it's a tough subject. I almost learned to err on the side of caution. But that's not the message I want people to have. I want people to find their support, find their allies, and be okay. And that's actually one of the reasons why I am taking this step and why I've been taking this step. My hope is that through these conference sessions that I've been doing, other people can, well, first of all, identify that there's a need to talk about it. And then also people with autism who are on the Double Rainbow can feel comfortable sharing. And even if they don't know if they can share to other people, at least they'll know that they can talk to me and Beth, and we'd be able to connect them with other people who might be able to as well. So that's my hope. But you had also mentioned our conference coming up, and I know I kind of got off topic. I do that sometimes. But the conference I think is going to be really exciting. We really do want people with autism to attend, as well as service providers and parents who are interested in this topic to attend, as well as a lot of our other topics. I don't want to say just come to my session. I don't think the other speakers would.
Be a lot of great sessions across the board.
There are a lot of great sessions, but we are. I'm particularly proud of this session. It's been a lot of work. I put a lot of effort into the PowerPoint and rehearsing and and I want to be very thorough so that people feel like they're walking away from it with a good understanding. But we have, so we do actually have reduced rates for parents and people with autism so that they can attend. Hopefully that helps, but sometimes, a little bit more support is needed to help cover the cost of a conference. So we also have volunteer opportunities. So people can work a day and then have a whole day of sessions. But we try to make it, don't want anyone to be deprived of information. So we at Milestones just want to have lots of supports available.
And people can find out about that by going to milestones.org?
Yes. And then there should be a big banner on the top of the page talking about the conference. And then if you click on that, then click on register. There's some information about the opportunities that are available. It's also a good opportunity to get CEUs. There's a Kent State grad credit if you're a graduate student. We offer, because we're really trying to get medical professionals trained in just autism as a whole, we really want them to feel prepared as they're entering into the workforce and working with families with autism. So we offer different rates for medical students, and we really try to make it as accommodating and as accepting as possible. We also have sensory rooms and lunches and dinners, or lunches and breakfast, not dinners, and parking, and so we try to make it pretty convenient.
Well, Nathan, it was a pleasure as always. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Sometimes we wish we were normal. We hope you understand. This is not fun at all. There are some times we fear we can't improve. Everyone around us has said that we've improved. Taking longer to study, longer to learn. It also takes us longer to complete tasks at hand. Having Asperger's, not making sense. Our actions are different from you, a human too. Who am I? I'm a human too. I'm just like you with ASD. Who am I? I'm a human too. I'm just like you with ASD.
Thank you for listening to today's episode, and thank you so much to Nathan for the conversation. Did you know that Autism Personal Coach saves people with autism from feeling alone and being isolated? So often teens and adults with autism struggle with anxiety and as a result don't have success in their lives. Autism Personal Coach is a unique service in that we help those with autism by working on meaningful, individualized goals in the setting in which they'll be used, so anxiety is greatly reduced, and as a result they can become more independent and successful. To get an autism coach for a loved one or yourself, it's very easy. All you have to do is email autismpersonalcoach@yahoo.com or call 216-336-5889 and request a coach today. On next week's episode of Autism Stories, we will talk with Haley Dunn about the upcoming National Autism Conference presented by Milestones Autism Resources. Talk to you then.